Now, for more on this story, let's bring in Mariam Wardak. She's a social activist and a former consultant of the country's national security advisor. She joins us from Washington, D.C. Mariam, it's great to have you with us on the program again. 900 more prisoners released. This comes as part of this latest 3-day truce. Is it too premature to have high hopes for peace in Afghanistan, given that the February deal has been very much hanging by a thread?
We have to take into consideration that the peace process involves two parties, so there's no quick fixes here. For now, there is signs of progress. The fact that the confidence-building measures from the Taliban to call a ceasefire for 3 days, and the fact that the Afghan government is now going to has released 900 and will release a total of 2,000. These are confidence-building measures. I want to reflect on the past of other agreements before, because I think that the world community is looking for a quick solution for Afghanistan, and I don't think that that's possible. You had the discussion between the Colombian government and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, and that agreement remains in jeopardy and falling apart. Then you also had the Darfur peace agreement that was signed by the government of Sudan and the Sudan Liberation Army. But violence, right after the agreement was signed, violence broke out because everybody in the world community was looking for quick fixes. And a country like Afghanistan, where war has been prominent for the past 41 years, we have to take into account that this process is going to be long and steady. And I think that the events that have taken place recently, those are signs of progress.
So a long and steady process, as you just mentioned. The US has been praising Afghanistan's latest efforts, saying they will push for a, quote, long-term ceasefire and the start of direct negotiations soon. It doesn't sound like that's attainable for the time being, certainly.
Well, I think that there's going to be struggles, and I think it's not only the U.S. I mean, many other nations have praised what has been happening in the past 3 days and calling for now a permanent ceasefire. You've had NATO, you've had Indonesia, and you had many other nations.
And how do you see this bloodshed playing out in Afghanistan? Of course, the Americans have been blaming the Islamic State group for the recent spike in violence. You've got the Afghan officials who've pointed the finger at the Taliban.
Well, I would like to give a general perspective. So Afghan National Defense Security Forces are fighting multiple fronts. You have the Afghan Taliban that they were fighting and currently is at halt. You have the regional terrorist groups. You have the international terrorist groups, where Al-Qaeda and ISIS fall under. But then you have something that's really strong currently in Afghanistan, where you and I had discussed on the show last thing, which is criminal activity, random shootings on motorcycles. So the Afghan National Defense Security Forces are fighting so many fronts. So this little progress step is a major hope for everybody in the community. All I could hope is that so now after this, there's going to be a process called the intra-Afghan negotiation, where a group that's going to represent the Afghan population is going to start communicating with the Afghan Taliban. Now, what we can hope is that there is a form of communication, and then there is some sort of understanding and progress that takes place. And what we can do, what we could hope for within the international community, is how we can help this process move smoother. I know the regional countries have put a lot of pressure on the Afghan Taliban, especially Pakistan, and we need to continue these kind of efforts to bring some sort of stability in Afghanistan.
Let's move the conversation beyond the Taliban and the violence that we've just been discussing. Would you say that, because of course the country is also exposed to political infighting, would you say that the power-sharing agreement between Ashraf Ghani and his rival Abdullah, that they've also helped this process? Do you think their accord, which was recently clinched, will steer the country towards some stability?
So let me clarify what the difference in this agreement versus the last presidential agreement is. So the last presidential agreement, they somehow had to share the executive power. This time, this has been tailored to both of their strengths. So President Ghani will have full authority of executive power, and he will do what he does best. He's a technocrat, so he's going to focus on governance and how to rebuild institutions. But Abdullah is really good at bringing together the people. That's his asset. So now he's going to sit down with other political influencers and try to see how they can bring peace forward. So this is I cannot tell you that it's going to be a rosy pathway. Of course, it's going to be extremely difficult. We're dealing with egos. We're dealing with sensitivities. We're dealing with people who have post-traumatic stress disorders and psychological issues because of what's happened in the past 41 years in Afghanistan.
So, of course, we have a very long way to go. Mariam Wardak, I'd like to thank you once again for being with us here on France 24.